What's up, everybody? I'm Nick.
And I'm Colin.
And we are Still Bussin'. Welcome back, everybody. If you made it through the first episode and you're here listening to the second episode, congratulations. We're so stoked that you came back.
Absolutely.
Thank you for being here. Today on the show, we're going to be talking all about why getting older is still bussin', right? Like, people always talk about, we're getting older, this hurts, that hurts, I miss my youth. Saying is, youth is wasted on the young, right? But I'm here to say that we learned a lot from getting older, and there are so many benefits actually to getting older. Sure, there's the, undeniable, like, eventual physical decline, depending on what your age is and what your lifestyle is and genetics and all that kind of stuff.
Sports accidents.
Yes, which we'll probably have to touch on that in a future episode later.
Yeah.
But essentially, I think, the positive side of, or the bussin' side of age is wisdom in life, right? Like, it's life experiences, less time wasted on pointless things and more about figuring yourself out and what you care about and what you want to spend your time on. So that's why I think getting older is actually still bussin'. And I think for me, there was a time, like right around when I turned 30 almost, I kind of thought, this is the peak. Like, I'm going to be 30 now. I honestly didn't expect to live past 30. I was like, all right, well, my 20s are great. How are these wonderful experiences? And now I'm 30. Like, I will be okay if life didn't really go on for. I was kind of really depressed in my late 20s, early 30s. Someone once told me, well, when you're turning 30, it's your Saturn return.
Saturn return.
And I said, I don't know what that means, but is that why I feel so sad? And then I went to therapy.
I've never driven a Saturn. I don't think I could return one.
Do they even still make Saturns? Yeah. So yeah, it was the Saturn return, whatever that meant. So, and looking back now that I'm basically in my 50s, I feel like I'm not in my 50s. If you're watching this on video, I'm at the ripe age of somewhere in my mid 30s. I survived. And you know what? It is kind of bussin' being in my 30s.
It's awesome.
I'm like in better physical health, which is great. But that aside, we push that aside.
Yeah.
I feel like I know more what I care about. I'm more confident.
Yeah.
Hence, two guys who should not be having a podcast. We're sitting here having a podcast. And there's just so much that's not talked about that you really get with a little bit more age.
Oh yeah. And I think culturally too, we've lived on this really old timeline system of 20, you college, 21, you drink, you get your job, you go, you figure it out, you get settled somewhere, wife, kids, 30, house, boom, boom, boom. There's all these kind of checkpoints that are built into our culture that tell you where things need to happen. And as we've grown into this digital age where people can pop off in incredible ways at 35, 45, 55, we've kind of redefined what that timeline is. And that what used to be 30, I think is now almost 40s. Like when it was oh, you're single and you're 30, you're a lost cause. It's maybe 40s, sometimes 50s. My parents found their partners later in life. So it's understandable to be not on this system, but also that 30 thing, to your exact point. Oh my God. I know I was, and you had some really good things going on, but I know we were both kind of figuring our careers out in our 20s, and it was scary at times. It was lost this job for me, lost this client, lost this opportunity, struggling to make rent a couple times. I was sleeping on floors, everything was a nightmare. Not a nightmare. It was really fun, but there was a lot of things that were terrifying in your 20s.
For sure.
And all of a sudden I hit 30 and I got a roster of clients that are healthy. I know what I want out of life. I've got good spending habits. I've made enough mistakes early enough when people allowed it, where I screwed up a lot of my 20s, and then I get into my 30s. I've kind of got it dialed. I'm getting everything finessed, but it's oh, I've got time, money, understanding of how things work, credibility to pursue things that are outside my capabilities. And it's all of a sudden the world became limitless in our 30s. And it's people don't talk on that enough.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it is pretty interesting. You touched on something. You said people can make it or they can pop off at any age.
Yeah.
I think what popped into my head was that like story of the KFC guy that was like
Yeah.
old. What was he, like 60 or 70? Is like,
Yeah.
Kentucky Fried Chicken.
He might, I think it was like, late 50s and being like, I'm telling you, KFC, it's the thing. And everyone's like, all right, old man, calm down. Totally.
Huge. Yeah.
One of my favorite comedians of all time, Rodney Dangerfield, was, and I feel bad that I'm forgetting the stat after saying he's one of my favorites, but like Rodney Dangerfield was either in his 40s or 50s when he started pursuing comedy. And then after that, he gets, Caddyshack and all these hit movies, and he's an incredible comedian. And I get no respect, like incredible bits that are iconic. And it's like, he didn't pursue that until 40. And there's all those, kind of cheesy Instagram stories of like Vera Wang designed her first dress at 37 or, whatever. But it's like, there is a lot of validity in, we assume because of cultural norms and the Zuckerbergs and the kind of outliers of the world who have figured it out in their 20s, like, why don't I have an app that's killing it in my 20s? Why don't I have a career? Why don't I have 45 clients? And it's like, well, there's so much value in screwing up that maybe you got to screw up enough to deserve those things in your 30s. Maybe. It's not always for everyone, but like, I know I definitely benefited from that.
Very true. So life is not over in your late 20s, early 30s, or even in your 40s. You can start stuff at any age. Sure, it gets harder and there are barriers at each level, right? Like you think, oh my gosh, well, it would be logistically harder if you were to start a business at 45 and you do have a wife and kids, right? But definitely not impossible. And I think with age, you start to be able to siphon things in different buckets. Like, this is what I do with my free time. This is what I do with my work time. This is what I do with, my exercise time, right? You figure out different areas and you're not just running around with your head cut off. As fun as it is in your 20s to run around with your head cut off, right?
And you should.
You just say yes to everything and you're just like, this is amazing, which you should. If you're young, teens, 20s, like go for it. Take risks, try different jobs, try different businesses. Don't be afraid to like walk away from stuff that you don't want to do or that you do want to do.
You just reminded me of something.
Yeah.
You just reminded me of a story I told last night to a friend of mine. And it's an anecdote that I heard from multiple people who do not know each other about the same place. So we grew up in a beautiful place in northern San Diego, Carlsbad. Love. Don't move here, please. House is already expensive enough. There's a spot here called Army Navy Academy. And we know more than a few people who have either worked there, gone there, or just been through the system. I've heard from multiple people there. And this anecdote is a great example of the value of turning 30. There were a lot of kids who went there because they had structured parents who had a path for them created. Mm-hmm. And then there were a lot of kids who went there, almost me included, who
you were a bad kid.
Yeah, hit the end of the line. And it was either this or, possibly much, 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 much worse outcomes. And the interesting thing that when you hear those, this child A, child B, everyone's going to assume the child with the structured setup,
going to do much better.
They're going to kill it. Yeah, they got the parents, they got the path, everything's designed for them. Child B, they're a mistake, they fucked up. Whatever it is, people would think that person is maybe going to have a harder time. At Army Navy, I'd heard more than a few people say it was child B who excelled because the child A essentially wasn't given permission to ruin things and fail without massive consequences, whereas child B has dealt with their consequences. Yeah. They have dealt with their failures and they are now rebounding from that. And sometimes have been rebounding and sometimes they, not everyone gets it together. Not everyone's successful regardless, but those kids who they thought were maybe harder causes would have massive success because they got it out of their system. That's what your 20s is. Your 20s is like letting the pressure valve off. And then in your 30s, you can be like, okay, what was it I wanted to do?
It reminds me of that saying that's like, imagine how wise we would all be if we could learn from other people's mistakes.
Oh, man.
Right? Oh. There's something that's particularly spicy about messing something up yourself that you never forget,
Yeah.
And I think as long as you always still have effort and you stay bussing, all right, you keep working on things, even if you make those mistakes, you give yourself some grace and you make the next mistake, right? I think it was your parents always said, Colin, you always find a way to fail forward, right? You always find a way to stumble into something better. And
my dad, dude, that was my dad who said that.
Yeah.
He was 100% right. I was quitting a job that was the best job I ever had at the time. like I had finally got my first big like TV show job, and it was like, you know, it allowed me to buy my first new car. Like all these incredible things were happening. And I was like a year and a half in, and I saw the writing on the wall and things were starting to not go well. And I was like, maybe I quit. And I bounced this off my dad, and he just really point blankly, to your point, he's just like, you know, you've just been failing upwards your whole life. And I would tell you not to quit this job because it's a good job, but like you clearly have figured something out. So keep going. And I was like, okay. I quit that job, and sure enough, the next gig was shockingly better that I had no clue I was even going to be in the running for had I not quit that job. But yeah, that failing upwards, people forget that you can do that.
Yes. Isn't it a Shel Silverstein book, Falling Up? All those poems.
Is it really?
That's it. That's it. That's your reading assignment for this podcast is read the poems from the good old Shel Silverstein book, Falling Up. I wonder if there are some like inspirational type ones.
I'm sure.
In that, you know, because as a kid, you read poetry, you know, in classes or whatever. And you're like, oh, I wonder what this poem means. I don't know. I'm 9. I have zero context on the whole world. And then you're like, oh, maybe this guy was just, maybe Shel Silverstein was the original Still Bussin.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. Dude, I got in like second grade, I got in trouble. Not in trouble. They had to call my mom because so we had to do a class assignment on like poems, and we had a bunch of books of poems. And I wrote my class assignment on one that was called Nobody. And it was about this lowly kid. Nobody loves me. Nobody cares. Nobody feeds me peaches and pears. I remember I was like second grade. I turned my assignment. And the teacher was like, are you okay? I was like, no, what? I picked a poem. You told me to pick a poem. And my mom like cracked up about it. She's like, yeah, you just didn't know what you were reading.
It's amazing. Well, by and large, I think the idea of this episode, right? Hopefully we've driven it home a little bit, is that you get older, right? Maybe you become a little bit physically dilapidated. Hopefully you don't. Hopefully you find a way to take care of yourself. But I know genetics and your lifestyle are a huge way that, you know, that play into that. However, you know, getting older is not so bad. It's kind of a privilege, right? You kind of get that wisdom, and you don't see it when you're young. You're just like, oh, you're 30. You do sound old. But, you know, if you're 21, maybe there's something that 35-year-olds have that you're just not capable of seeing. Oh, you can't see that until you're on the other side of it. And I think that's kind of the way life is. And you know, you realize, what's that saying? When you're young, you think everybody's watching you, and then the older you get, you realize no one was watching you at all.
Yeah. Oh wow, I've never heard that, but that's great.
And that's why nobody cares. That's why you catch me at Zumba class, baby, because I don't care who's watching me, dude. I'll shimmy all day long.
I love it.
On that note, I really don't have too much more left for this podcast. Do you have anything else you want to close it out?
I think we nailed it. Being 30 is still bussin'.
Still bussin'. All right, guys. We'll see you in the next episode. Thanks so much for being here.